I want to thank the SUNY Global Center, Johanna Kendricks-Jones, and Jennifer Mack, and of course Anna Oliveira, the CEO of the New York Women's Foundation, who's our co-sponsor. We use this room quite a bit, actually, for events that I do right here in my district, and as you can see, and we'll see soon, thank you, it's an excellent room to do these kinds of events because you have a round table in the middle or an oval table, and everybody gets a microphone, and everybody can see each other. They should try this model for world peace. Maybe it would actually work. We have invited an audience of advocates and experts. If you feel like tweeting, seriously, if you feel like tweeting, we're hoping you'll use hashtag #WomenAgeWell, exclamation point. Hashtag #WomenAgeWell, exclamation point. There is a Wi-Fi network and password on the back of your program. The speakers will introduce themselves shortly. Their full bios are in your program. There's one slight change of plans. The DIFTA Commissioner, Lorraine Cortez Vasquez, is suddenly not able to join us, but we're pleased that her Deputy Commissioner, Azadeh Khalili, is able to join us. Thank you for being here with us. Also, you might notice that there is instantaneous translation of whatever you say into a microphone on these screens. That's called Google. A live captioning program from Google. It's actually pretty amazing. We've been trying to use it at various events we've been doing. And, oh, hello, Councilwoman Helen Rosenthal, welcome. And it is very cost effective and allows you to expand your ability to communicate with people with hearing disabilities, which is a growing percentage of all of us. This is also a growing reality for older people. And so my staff have been exploring various models of how we can make the work we do more accessible to different communities. And I have to say, this one is pretty impressive because you need a computer, the app, and some screen to show it on. And you can use it in whatever you're doing as well. So I'm looking at Madeline Brunwell from my office because she actually understands how to do it. I don't. So thank you. All right, so Roundtable participants told us we have great leaders who are older women. The names that got mentioned quite frequently, Nancy Pelosi, Elizabeth Warren, and several of you mentioned RBG, for just the initials. And really, we need her every day. When we asked what many people believe about older women, you said nobody likes them. They are sexless, unattractive, and burdensome. When they speak, nobody listens. Older women are invisible. There's a great contrast between the description and the feeling we get when we see a newly iconic picture of Nancy Pelosi standing and pointing at the president and all the president's older men. And yet, we still carry these stereotypes and impressions about who older women are. And again, we were just talking to older women. This is not a national survey. This is a one-on-one conversation with a variety of you when we were setting up for this event. We need to remind ourselves that older women have capacity, expertise, authority, and experience, qualities we all value. We have sort of a setup where I'm going to ask certain people to present first, and then actually one particular, and then we're going to move into back and forth dialogue with the rest of the roundtable. And towards the end, we will also have an opportunity to open it up to other people in the audience. So I am not, just double checking, I'm not going to actually introduce everyone. I'm going to ask them each to just introduce themselves and then roll into Dr. Lisa Hollis-Sawyer, who actually, when we found her, and that she's an expert on these issues, feminism, ageism, and how they intersect, Then we learned she's from Chicago, and we're like, oh, wrong city. And then she said, yes, I would love to come to your city to talk about it. So why don't we start off just by going around the table. Anna, if you introduce yourself.
Anna Oliveira, the New York Women's Foundation.
Lisa Hollis-Sawyer, Gerontology Program Coordinator, Northeastern Illinois University, Chicago.
Jacqueline Ebanks, Executive Director, Mayor's Commission on Gender Equity.
The Dean of Columbia University's Mellon School of Public Health.
Levine, President and CEO of Caring Times.
Azadeh, Khalili, Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Programs in the Department for the Aging in New York City.
Bobbie, Sackman, Workplace Discrimination Coordinator with the New York State Alliance for Retired Americans.
Lilliam, Barrios-Paoli, Hunter College.
Kathy Wylde, Partnership for New York City.
Sussman, New York State Commission on Human Rights.
Reagan, Women's Center for Education and Career Advancement.
Vicki, Deputy Mayor for Housing and Economic Development for the city.
Thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. You going to come up here?
Yep.
Great. And yes, feel free to bring the mics closer to your height and mouth. Bobbie's was drooping, but maybe you fixed it.
Yeah, well, afraid to touch it again.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm deeply honored. Yes, I did have to travel from Illinois to talk about this, but that's okay. I'm a loud advocate in Illinois too, but I believe this is a global issue. I would personally like to thank Wendy and Senator Krueger for having me. This is an important discussion, needs to be done, needs to have been done a long time ago, and we have been talking about this for a while, but I think we have to come together as a ethical, caring society to really make sure that this movement, among others, is there for a growing aging population. As you probably know, through at least 2060, we're going to experience global aging at an exceedingly rapid rate. Japan is a super aging society. America will be there soon. And within that, the aging woman, which has the advantage of female viability, will be living longer than ever before. And we have to understand, among other things, the importance of these very needed issues of advocacy and making sure there's equity and social justice applied to older women. So let's get started. So, what are we going to talk about today? You've seen the slides, so I will not read the slides. What is feminist theory? We'll talk about aging, ageism, and older women. And lastly, why the feminist movement needs to embrace older women more in terms of issues and support and advocacy. So we're at a crossroads related to what we're doing here. So as you have seen in the slide that was provided to you, feminist theory does cover a lot of issues and very important issues related to being a woman in our lifespan. Unfortunately, one of the critical things that I have tried to highlight, and I had an American Psychological Association Greek article about, is the need to really embrace aging in our society globally, because there's so many issues related to being older in society and being a woman in society, and those interesting double jeopardy issues related to that, let alone the intersectionality of other things such as culture, gender role, all those things, economics, education, that again create this very complex picture of what it means to be an older woman in society. So if we're thinking about this on a global basis, what do we have to address? Well, among other things, if we think about it, it's access to housing, it's economic issues, it's wage gap disparity. That does create, over a woman's lifespan, a real issue of what's termed feminization of poverty. I'm sure you've heard of that term. We have to understand that. There's older generations of women, your mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, who weren't able to have a long-term career, but to be honest with you, and we all know this, the wage gap hits us now, right? So with this in mind, we are still seeing a disparity that is impacting healthcare resources, family support, elder care, so on and so forth. This is the issue. And when I bring up elder care, to be honest with you, who is the default caregiver in most societies, men or women? Yes, it's true. And it's just not the time commitment, it's the physical, it's the social, it's the emotional, it's the mental health, it's the economics of that that is really creating a very complex picture. I'm sure you've all heard of Brody's idea of the sandwich generation and women in the middle, correct? So it really does impact, among other generations, certainly women of today's generation, which might see that they're caring for an aging parent, an aging grandparent, even an aging great-grandparent I've seen in Chicago, as well as dependent adult children and even their children. I've seen households through my research that had 5 or 6 generations within them. And the women, usually in the middle generation, are the ones caring and supporting. And what is the impact on their aging, we really have to acknowledge and advocate for. So, just to throw out some statistics. Through 2011 through 2050, as it says on your slide, there is going to be a huge increase in just the U.S. alone in the number of older women. But to be honest with you, sometimes don't you think age becomes almost a line in the sand, if you're with me? What I mean by that is, I've literally heard people, different professionals even, that say, I'm not older yet. Right? Do you understand what I'm saying? So when I teach my gerontology students at the undergraduate and graduate level, one of my first questions is, please raise your hand if you're aging. I will have a group of 35 people and maybe 1 or 2. Right? And I try to explain to them that aging is human development. We age as soon as we're created. Right? Because, and then we have a discussion about anti-aging, right? That message, that societal message that, again, to be honest with you, Senator Krueger mentioned this huge issue. If we are fighting aging, you've seen those commercials, let's fight aging, right? Then you become invisible. Then it becomes a negative. That's a horrible message, don't you think? To not be able to embrace who you are, right? But to reject who you are. Let alone the double jeopardy of being a woman in society, right? So all of these things coming together. So it's an ethical imperative for educators, researchers, community outreach people, such as the lovely people in this room who are helping families, who are helping people. But what's really not necessarily on the radar for the general public is the idea of what does it mean to be an older woman? What is that juxtaposition between those two paths crossing at that crossroads? And I see a lot of people that get lost in the public policies and programs. I have an interesting story, only because I think when we talk about ageism, it's thought to be, well, that applies to older adults, right? It's not true. There's a concept called reverse ageism. Are you all familiar with that idea that younger people can equally be impacted by this? That's why I'm trying to say it's a universal concept. We have to embrace both age, but ageism understanding. So let me give you an example. I was doing my postdoc at Boston University a long time ago, about 22 years ago, and there was an interesting case that my director came up to the group with. She was working with public assistance programs, and she heard of a case of a 28-year-old woman who applied for credit support as a grandmother. Now, she was 14 when she had her daughter. Her daughter was 14 when she had her child. She was a 28-year-old grandmother. Understand her trajectory. Do you understand what? She could easily be a great-grandmother in her lifetime. Not breaking that cycle. But here's the rub. The public programs at that time did not recognize her as a grandmother. They would not provide support. Do you see where I'm going with this? We have to understand the needs of unique aging trajectories of people, because if we don't, if we pigeonhole people in a certain way, it's not going to help them. It's not going to help society. We have lovely people who are women in our society who are older and wise and experts, and we're not embracing them, we're not utilizing them. We're not, because we're saying, why aren't you going? Why aren't you leaving? I've had colleagues that have literally said in their 70s, people in their departments and educational institutions will say, isn't it about time that you let your position go for someone new to come in? They're very vital people, experts in their field, and they feel that their value is not there. That valuation is key. So, doing feminism, this idea by Haywood and Drake, to understand what feminism is and apply it in society. Well, I will extend that to doing aging feminism. Understand that we are all aging from birth onwards, from conception onward. We have to be cognizant of this universal experience. if there's one thing we can't stop is aging, no matter what the 2 a.m. commercials say, right? We can't. Embrace it, understand it. Other societies, to be honest with you, in the world actually acknowledge the beauty of what it means to be an older woman, but we're not there yet. In a lot of cultures, and I would certainly say on some level, certainly our broader U.S. culture. The invisibility issue I do want to highlight again. I do a lot of research talking with elder caregivers and older women in the workplace. Invisibility, they say, is so real. It really is something that we have to acknowledge. Have any of you felt that way? You thought, my opinion, my words are not being heard? I'll make fun of myself. I've been in meetings. It's sexism and ageism, and on some level I think operating here, not to disparage my male colleagues who are lovely, but sometimes I'll be in a meeting and I'll make a comment, not really acknowledged. Then my male colleague will say almost exactly the same thing. Hey, that's a great idea. Now, I'll tell you, I can be a shrinking violet, but sometimes I'll say, hey, wait a minute. I think I said that, right? Because isn't that interesting on some level of being heard, right? We have to be voices, we have to be advocates. So, if we're not acknowledging ageism, if we're not dealing with this, guess what? We're doing a disservice to every generation of women to come. Everyone experiences this. And it's just not a women's issue, I'll be honest with you. When I teach psychology of women, I teach really psychology of gender. Understanding gender identity. Understanding everyone's experiences, because everyone is touched by this. We have to do a better job. We really, really do. If we're living longer than ever before, and some level we are, but although it seems like the life expectancy is starting to maybe hit a ceiling due to lifestyle and things like that, but understand that we, through our intergenerational contacts, have to spread the message. Older women are valued, older women are a force to be reckoned with, and they need to be utilized in a lot of different ways. So, with a feminist lifespan perspective on aging, what do we need to do? Well, among other things, just acknowledge we're not separate. We are the same people. Hillary Clinton said women's rights are human rights. That's completely true. Everyone experiences aging. Why should we ignore it? Why should we deny it? Embrace it. Understand? Yeah, we're dealing with different things. And our aging is different than our mother's generation, grandmother's generation, of course. But if we don't acknowledge the complexities of it, we can't possibly create laws and programs and everything else that can better assist. To be honest with you, there are certain public policies that are out of date. How many of you know what the legal age for protection as an older worker is?
40.
Age 40. When I teach that, most of my undergrads, even graduates, will say 55, 60. No, 40 based upon very old data, right? And not acknowledging how old we are. Now, no one's going to touch that. That's a protected class. And I will tell them that. No one's going to change it. But a lot of our programs and policies and legislation are out of date. They're not helping who they should. Social Security alone, I could do a lecture on, right? That's it. You know, we have to be really much more sensitive to population demographics and, of course, where the woman's aging generation is going. So, as an ethics society, as a caring society, we have to do this. So again, paraphrase Hillary Clinton. I like a lot of what she says in terms of phrases. You might have heard her say, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, guess what? It takes a village to empower women and to empower older women to make sure that they're utilized and they're heard in society. So, all of these complexities, understand that nothing's going to be one size fits all, but to acknowledge it, to change healthcare systems, to really look at community programming and legislation is very important. Thank you very much.
And my partner in crime this morning, Anna, I shouldn't joke that way.
Not today.
As far as we know, everything we're doing is legal.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to acknowledge the leadership of Senator. That's what I wanted to do. and your ability to center what isn't centered, what is not exactly the popular topic, is so needed, so necessary, and has made so much difference to all of us. That's the first thing. The other is that the foundation is really honored to be able to partner with you and all of you here. We are very aware that the best place for philanthropy to be is to follow leadership. And so that's how we come to this conversation. I also want to acknowledge other leaders in philanthropy here, from Julio Urbina from the Fan Fox Foundation, and Lisa Ryerson from the AARP Foundation, because funding in, I'm going to say with an aging lens, is a very rare thing to find in the field of philanthropy. But I also want to say that the New York Rose Foundation in particular comes to this conversation also with the lenses around economic disparities, poverty, the legacies, and the continuity of racist policies that increase the jeopardies that folks are living with, as we're saying now, in the later parts of life. So let alone issues around gender expression and that all live together, right? So I just wanted to say that we're really pleased to be able to support the work that is being discussed here today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And when Anna just said that, and the role of philanthropy, and it is crucial, so I'm very glad that a number of her colleagues from philanthropy are with us today. I will tell you what the director of a program serving older people said to me. He said, I was fundraising and fundraising and fundraising, and no one was responding, and they kept saying, older people, they never go away. And so, which is technically true. And so it's a different group of us every day, but we never really go away. And so he said that they started a program for dog therapy to visit seniors. And he said it was a little program when it started, and then he realized everyone wanted to give money for the dogs. So he's like thinking, I just won't say it's an actual organization serving older New Yorkers. I'll talk about it as if we have dog therapy, and people keep sending money. And I thought, what a reflection on how we prioritize. I love dogs, by the way, don't like write up tweets. I love dogs, but there seems to be a priority, at least among some in their philanthropic giving, that they prefer animals to people. And that's a real issue, I think, for us to confront when following up on Lisa's point about the culture and how we think about ourselves and people in age in our culture. So I'm just going to throw out a few questions. And it's true, we advance mention to people around the round table. We might call on them for X, Y, or Z topic. But one, what does it mean to be both older and a woman in today's society? Have these perceptions changed over successive generations or remain the same? And when we were pre-interviewing, we learned that New York City is soon going to have a big announcement. And so Deputy Mayor Vicki Bean, and she introduced herself as Deputy Mayor. Like, it's not clear the city runs unless she's staying on top of things. So I am particularly honored that she is with us this morning. But if you talk a little bit about what your experience has shown you and what this survey might teach us all.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying thank you both so much for organizing this. It's such an important issue and such an overlooked issue. And we New Yorkers are very, very lucky to have someone of Senator Krueger's experience, brilliance, dedication, and work ethic leading so many things that are important to the city and important to all of us New Yorkers. So thank you so much.
That'll be the last nice thing said about Liz. It's okay.
But the city is digging into this issue. We formed several years ago women.nyc. If you don't follow us, please do, because there's all kinds of incredible work going on around women's issues in general. Women.nyc is led by the incomparable Faye Penn. Faye, you want to say hello? And one one of the issues that they are tackling is this issue of how should we be providing more, especially workforce help, to older women. And so they embarked several months ago on a project to really understand the kinds of problems that women in that age group are facing and to suggest some solutions. So that will be coming out in the next few weeks. So please watch for that, and we'll make sure that it's circulated to everybody here. But let me just highlight some of the things that we're finding about the problems that are facing women over 50, and kind of fill in some of what you gave as really the big picture. So in New York, we have more than 1.5 million women who are over 50 years of age. That's about a fifth of our population. That is increasing rapidly. People are living longer, people are staying in the city more, and so it is a population that we really need to be targeting all of our resources towards. Those women are incredibly vulnerable to financial insecurity, right? When they are employed, they are more likely to have part-time jobs with fewer benefits. Women over 50 often, of course, don't benefit from being part of a dual income family because of widowhood, changes in marriage, not being married, all of those things. And unfortunately, they are facing increasing levels, not decreasing, but increasing levels of discrimination. While women's wages as a fraction of men's wages in New York City for ages 25 through 49 is women make 84 cents to a man's dollar. The ratio for women over 50 is only 77 cents. That's 7 cents less for older women than from their younger cohorts. And unfortunately, that gender gap has widened over the last decade. It has increased by about 5% for women over the age of 50. So we're going backwards, not forward. That's never a good thing. This is something that really struck me. On average, a woman's earning potential peaks earlier and lower than a man's earning potential. So a university-educated woman in the United States today sees her earnings peak at about $67,000 at age 44, while a man's peaks at $101,000 at about age 55. So women are on the downside while men are continuing to increase their earning potential, and obviously for many, as they increase their earning potential, they also increase their retirement potential and their retirement assets. Anytime, of course, there's a gap in a resume, it's suspect to future employers, and as women age, those gaps become both more frequent and more suspicious to people, right? And of course, those gaps are often caused by exactly the kinds of sandwich responsibilities, caring for children, caring for older family members, that women bear a very disproportionate share of. There are more than 11 million Americans, 28% of all caregivers are simultaneously caring for children and older adults, and 61% of those are women. Women who are caregivers are 2.5 times more likely to live in poverty and 5 times more likely to be drawing Social Security than people who are not caregivers. And caregiving reduces the earning potential of women very dramatically, and especially middle-aged and older women. It reduces their earning capacity by about 41%, and the negative impact on retirement assets is about $40,000 for women who are caregivers. So it's a very, very significant set of challenges that women and especially older women face. So stay tuned. We're really digging into a lot of that, both the demographics and the experiences of women, and we'll be coming out with more of that very soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So expanding the lifespan is a triumph. action on this issue.
So, good morning, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, my position first is to add to the thanks for doing this. I'm having trouble with my mic staying up, so we'll see what happens.
You could also take this out of this whole
Right.
Okay, perfect.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'll try and respond to the Senator's question from several different points of view from my own background. So I'm a geriatrician. I'm a gerontologist who has spent her career trying to understand how we help people stay healthy in now longer lives. And I also, as a public health professional, have tried to understand how we implement what we've learned. And the privilege of having added a role in the last week, which is that I'm also now the director of the Robert Butler Columbia Aging Center. In addition to being the dean of the School of Public Health at Columbia. And I have the great pleasure of teaching a course called Your Longer Life for Columbia undergraduates, graduates, and a huge number of people in the community who are at the course. And I just want to say that Your Longer Life has a parenthesis around the first Y. To emphasize that whatever an individual can do is totally dependent for the success of the individual in terms of planning for longer life and how we do this collectively. So that's just a little background, but there are many issues. I think when I was in training as a physician, the argument was, would prevention work and matter for older people? Now, I'm an older woman, but that wasn't that long ago. And now it's self-obvious because the science has been so compelling that prevention works and matters at every age and stage of life into the oldest stages. And we almost now take that for granted, but it was an argument 2 to 3 decades ago. And what that means is that we have the opportunity to transform health futures for everyone, but it will require real transformation, not just in our thinking, not just in our narrative about what the opportunity is, but transformation in our understanding of what our societal institutions need to invest in. So we now know that we can, from a public health point of view, create health into longer lives. The U.S. has done a number of natural experiments, not intentional experiments, but natural experiments. And what we now know is that people who across their lives have benefited from increased education, the right public health, healthy environments, decreased poverty, and the right medical care are aging long but with health. That we didn't used to know that. And that tells us that this is possible. But what we are seeing is huge health disparities for the people who across their lives haven't benefited from those conditions. And it's very clear that if we resolve those disparities of opportunity for the conditions that create health, which New York City is the leader of understanding, that we create the opportunity for people to age with health, all people to age with health. And what we do in midlife matters as much as what we do in younger ages and older ages in terms of investing in capabilities for health. That means actually, from my point of view, just speaking as a public health professional, that we have an opportunity to transform our public health systems, to understand that we're not just saving lives now, but we're investing in health futures, and that could matter. So I think that's point one. Point two is that this is an all-age group. Just to go back to the point that was made by our speaker, aging is not just about the elderly. And how we understand this as a life journey together in finite lives that we have is going to be really critical for shared investment. There are many interventions that I think we But there are many surrounding issues from affordable housing which older women are really at risk of now. And we know that as the issues of homelessness increases for older women, to issues of how we build, I think the U.S. was extremely successful in the 20th century in designing in independence and autonomy. We've been overly successful, I believe. And in the face of 21st century conditions, what we've done is we've actually designed in loneliness in everything from our social infrastructure to our societal institutions. And we need, I think, to turn to how we design social infrastructure, to design in connection and cohesion. For older women, loneliness is a very big issue, but quite frankly, it's a big issue for everybody over the age of 11 in our society, for some different reasons. And so how we think about designing everything, redesigning everything from senior housing to public spaces, to zoning, is going to be critical for a collective future that designs out loneliness, and I think we can do that. I'll end with two other points. One is to go back to the point that Lisa Hollis-Sawyer made about meaning and purpose. There is no age group in society for which it doesn't matter to get up in the morning for a reason. And that is true for elementary school kids, and it's true till we die. But we have not designed roles of meaning and purpose associated with older age, and we do not value either older women or older men in the roles we don't have, nor do we value the roles we accomplish, including caregiver. And we need to make a transformation in the understanding of the roles of the ways in which older people, women and men contribute, which are highly invisible and not valued economically. But in addition, I think we have a real need to design new roles with purpose, to harness, enable the assets that older people bring, which are highly unrecognized, and the science is compelling that we would all do better if we enabled those roles at scale with collective impact. People who are in them would do better, and society would do better to benefit from those assets. I'll mention one program, Experience for which I had the pleasure of creating, but it was in New York City until about 8 years ago, and then was ended. But this is a senior volunteer program now at AARP in 23 other U.S. cities to enable that older adults to contribute to ensuring the success of our children in public elementary schools. It's just one model, but it creates help, it creates well-being, it creates connection for the volunteers, it lowers cognitive decline, and it's been demonstrated to be a program that assures that children are succeeding at third grade. It's one of many models we need.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm already remiss this morning, there wasn't enough coffee in me when I started, to point out that, so stop saying nice things about me, but if you do feel nice things about me, it's because I have the best staff in government. And they're constantly working on issues for people. And the person who put together this event and puts together all my public events is Wendy Brennan. Where are you, Wendy? Breakfast meetings throughout the year targeted towards seniors and boomers, and they're different themes, but we have done quite a bit of work around addressing and confronting loneliness and the difference between mental health issues and loneliness and the critically negative impact that has on older people's health. So that is, I was appreciating you bringing that up. Wendy, when's our next breakfast?
March 5th.
Thank you.
Technology.
Technology and older people. So if you go online, get just sign up and you can get all the materials of what we're doing all year long. So Lilliam Barrios-Paoli, you have been the commissioner of most agencies in the city of New York. but I think are very well known for your role in aging and human services, in workers. You were a deputy mayor. You pretty much had every position. So I mean that well. So what do you take from all of this about what we haven't been doing right or what we could be doing better to both fight the mythology about older women and to change our culture and our programs?
So yes, I used to be somebody.
Oh, that's not what I meant.
No, and that's just echoing what was said before about older women becoming invisible and older women not being taken into account. I remember listening to my father saying that now that he had all the answers, nobody asked him any questions. And that was very poignant to me at the time, but I sort of dismissed it, and I totally realized how important that was. So I think that, we have to sort of begin to think, how do we change the cultural paradigm on how we view people in general as they age, but particularly women as they age. I think that the kinds of paradigms that we're using are things that emerged when people used to have shorter lives, when the role of women was very different, by necessity, not necessarily for any other reason, and so that we haven't really caught up with what the reality is. We still stereotype women in terms of the things that they can or should be doing by age. We still stereotype women in terms of ability, in terms of intelligence, in terms of everything else. And that just catches up with you as you age. I think also we have a tremendous cult of youth in our culture. I think sexuality, we sexualize almost everything. And so when you are no longer perceived to be sexual, because menopause has come, you are less of an entity, less of a, your definition, you're not a man, you're really not a woman anymore, so what are you? So I think we have to rethink all of those things. I think that women themselves don't help themselves. I think older women don't help themselves to sort of participate in the gender stereotyping as well. And I think, owning your own aging, your own self, it's really, really important. I'm not disparaging anything, but we do so much to pretend that we're not the age that we are. From plastic surgery, to hair dye, to any number of things. And I think it's fine for everybody individually to do it, but the symbolism of it is not accepting who we are, where we are in aging, where we are. And it's frightening. It is frightening because when you realize, when you turn a certain zero in your life and you realize that most of your life is behind you, not in front of you, very frightening. And then how you reinvent yourself for the next 10, 15, 20, whatever many years you have, it's scary. And I think that has to be acknowledged as well. I think that people need support. It does take a village. I agree completely with that. I think that, in primitive societies, ostracism was the big threat. And social isolation is very similar to that. So when people are by themselves in their apartment, yeah, we give them a home delivered meal, but, you don't talk to anyone for a long time. And that's profoundly isolating and profoundly painful. So I think it's a cultural change that has to happen, and I think we need to hasten it. And I think we need to be agents of our own aging, our own cultural change.
Thank you.
Can I just ask Lilliam something, because
Talking to the mic.
as the country is increasingly Hispanic in terms of population, my experience with the Latino culture, the Puerto Rican culture, is that it's very matriarchal, and older women are respected and honored. And I just was curious that Lilliam didn't mention that, but since she's a Latina at the table.
So yes, my grandmother was definitely the matriarch of our family, and she lorded it over all of us, and intergenerational, no question about it. I think that is still true in many societies, but I think as modernism seeps in, and I think as more societies become very homogeneous, you have to look at even young people. People are, they dress the same, they listen to the same music, and so on and so forth. All those cultural norms get get transmitted as well. So ageism is becoming more and more prevalent in more traditional societies as well. And certainly, the immigration experience erodes all of that. I mean, I certainly, you see traditional societies where grandma is here and she may be the caretaker, but she's no longer economically productive. So she's not as an important participant of that family anymore. So I think that that's part of what happens when you have a global village and when everybody sort of partakes through the internet and other means of the same culture. A lot of the traditional values get eroded, and that's a real
It's
problem.
interesting, that's a function of globalization.
Absolutely. I think that you absorb all those, just that you absorb everybody wearing jeans, you absorb the fact that being old is not that good a thing.
So, a decade ago, I gave myself a 50th birthday party and said, now that I'm proudly middle-aged. My parents immediately said, we're middle-aged, you can't be middle-aged. I was like, well, you're in your late 70s, so we'll have this conversation again at 110. I'm not. But then all my friends who were the same age as me were like, we're not middle-aged, you can't be middle-aged. I was like, damn, I hit a chord here that I didn't realize. I just thought, you're 50, you're middle-aged, what's the debate about it? Apparently enormous debate, but I do think it's all triggered by that getting older in our society has so many negative consequences. And so I'm going to go first to Jackie Ebanks about that, and then I'm going to go back to Lisa, because she touched on that a bit in her presentation.
I just want to add my word of thanks, and I'm sitting here with two of my former bosses, so I'm really at the aging table, so that's also interesting. Just want to first say, at the Commission on Gender Equity, we started our work in the last term of this administration by releasing a strategic plan. And that plan posited the intersectional lens. And we identified about 8 other identities that overlap with gender, age being one of them. And it was a challenge for the Commission not to simply look at its work through the gender lens, but to recognize that we as human beings bring multiple identities to the table at any point in time. So it's ability, age, faith, race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender expression, and I'm going to forget immigrant status, right, and in New York City. So when we strive to do our work as a commission, we're trying to look at whole human beings, and we're also looking at them across the lifespan, because as the professor said, you age from conception, right? We're all getting older. Lilliam used to say it's a lucky thing if you get older. We witnessed the mourning of Kobe at this time, and how traumatic it is when at midlife you have a down. So for me, one of the things I think about also is the media in this space. I stopped dyeing my hair. I stopped perming my hair. I will be 60 next year. No, this year. Oops. And I think, one of the things I started to do sort of early on is to look for these role models in the media. And what is media doing and how is it communicating aging? And fortunately, I happened up on Frankie and Grace on HBO, right, which has everything in it, right? Which has gender identity, gender expression, sex, and aging women, and the vitality of aging women. And, sure enough, Jane Fonda and Lilliam, great icons to bring to this table. And also bringing in a racial lens. So I really think that's something, as we do our policy, and we talk about cultural shift, we want to make sure, I think, that the policy frame is one that carries an intersectional lens at all times. We also want to make sure that it carries the lifespan well, because there are people who have aged now, who are the aging now, but there are people who are aging. And so your policies need to be responsive to both. The people who are aged now are probably in crisis, greater crisis than we need them to be. But we want to make sure that those crisis conditions are eliminated for the populations coming up. So the idea of how are we learning as a culture, as a society? How are we breaking barriers to gender discrimination? How do we integrate and keep people connected to society as they age? The one thing I want to say, and I'm totally in support of Lilliam on this, is that we are also responsible for driving that narrative and for creating that change. And as you look around this table, incredibly powerful women who are aging and are now at the older end, and we have opportunity to drive that change. I challenge that very often some of us stay in positions too long. And how are we looking at building the next generation? And we need to be very intentional. The role that I miss most in my life is the role of the elder statesperson. I sort of need a wisdom tank that I want to go to, and like Yoda, and just talk to that person, right? I myself feel, and I have 3 young daughters, I say, I'm tired, this is your world now, do something, right? And I challenge them a lot. And they say, well, you screwed it up, but that's another story. But I really think that it's that sense of understanding that we are not falling off the cliff, that there's a role to go into, how do we create sabbaticals for aging folks so that they can it can be financed, so that we have this opportunity to think as much as we're put on this treadmill to keep doing. So I really think the media needs to be a partner in this work. I think our public policy needs to have longitudinal and approach, and not always be subject to the urgency of politics. How does public policy making step aside from politics and the electoral system? I really think it corrupts our ability to, strategic policy decision making. We have a political system which is about how do you keep that person in office. And that intersection really damages the sort of life we all live and the culture we create. So I think those are the 2 or 3.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump back to Lisa in a minute, but I'm going to actually first jump in Bobbie Sackman, who actually brought this issue to the table for me and said, when you get older, people forget we had this women's revolution, and we were supposed to be bringing women into our society as equal players, and we know we didn't finish that job, but then you hit a certain age and...
When I'm 60. So, I'm going to add to some things that have already been said, and then hopefully a few additional points. We absolutely need a new paradigm. And I think that's what we're all saying in different ways. It's overdue to open this up, but demographics compel us to do this. And the way I've always put it is, as women, we fight really hard to not be reproductive creatures only. Well, if we're only talking about ourselves to somewhere in our 40s, culturally, politically, policy-wise, we've now self-defined ourselves. And until we start, you don't have to call it menopause, but let's say in their 40s, 50 and above, whatever, then we're putting ourselves in very narrow lanes. And so that's a challenge for all of us. Inequality across the lifespan is real. We've talked about intersectionality. Where you end up at old age often is because you've been marginalized your whole life, but not always. As we've said, we have women who perhaps have led careers, more professional, a little higher paid, and they just watch themselves in their 50s go way downhill, and there's no coming back. So we have a new stage of life. It is a success story. There's a book that I've come across, it's a textbook really, in 1998, and I'm wondering, Lisa, if you know this woman. She's a professor. She's the head of the School of Social Work in the University of Hawaii. I'm going to try to have a group trip to visit her. And her name is Colette Brown, and it's called Women, Feminism, and Aging. And I actually read some of the chapters, which is probably more than I did when I was in college. And so, and she uses great terminology. She really builds a good framework. She uses the term, ask older women what their power sources are. Talk to older women from a feminist perspective about their oppression, their diversity, their strength. Open up the conversation. How are we all complicit in the mistreatment of older women? And I woke up this morning, given what's going on in our country, and there was a word, and I had a particular dream last night. I was like, where did this come from? And the word abandonment came to me. I'm feeling abandoned right now on so many levels in this country. And yet, I think it also fits into the conversation. Abandonment is full of fear and anger and invisibility, and you could add other words as well. And so, how do we open it up? Using the term age justice. This is a social justice movement. Interestingly, the new kids on the block. But this is a social justice movement. Ageism/age justice. I think it's a term we could begin to build a new paradigm. People of different ages in different social justice movements can relate to that. And yes, it's very much intergenerational. I'll come back to that in one moment. I will thank you, Senator Krueger, because you're about to introduce a bill. Now I'm thanking you in your role as a senator, legislatively, and it will be the first time there's a bill introduced in the state Senate to prohibit employers from asking age and date of graduation. It's a step. It's a big step. And thank you. And I hope in our different ways, so there'll be an assembly bill, get the word out that your organization can jump on board. Because this is where it matters. When you're putting together, we all know you're going to Albany now, you can be here at City Hall, fighting too often for the same money. But how do we begin to put, if there aren't people at that advocacy table or other discussions that bring issues of older women to the table, then older women or older adults in general don't get talked about. And that's the new paradigm of everything. And I thank you also, Vicki, what you had mentioned about, and I've had the pleasure of meeting with Faye Penn recently, moving ahead, and I think it's going to be about older women and entrepreneurship, and that's a great step forward. And the other thing I want to mention, because this is all because I am an advocate at the end of the day, is that the New York Health Act now includes long-term care and other benefits for people of all ages, vision, hearing, etc. How do we get on board? I understand there's different feelings about it in the room. I work with a group called the Caring Majority Coalition. It's made up of seniors, people with disabilities, home care aides, and others. This is an issue of diversity. This is an issue of how do we treat home care aides. We often talk about the poor pay of child care workers. Well, home care aides come from the same communities. They're the same women. They're just taking care of different pieces of population. So how do we bring all of that together? And then, I'm sorry, I want to go back one more thing on the workplace discrimination. And because somebody, Jackie, I think you said this, and I understand how you framed it, and it was a good framing. But what happens all too often is that older women in many different ways are being asked or pushed out of a job. And what we hear is, you're taking my job away. Why don't you just get out of here already? Where else have we heard this? We heard this about women decades ago. We've heard this about people of color. We're hearing this about immigrants. This is not new. And now I want to segue into generational. The okay boomer thing, we can have our personal feelings, we can laugh, we can do whatever. But here's what it means to me. It means to me that we're not keeping our eye on that 1% and the people who hold the power. Because now the young people are just going to blame the old people. Well, we were the generation who didn't trust anybody over the age of 30. Well, it's come back to kick us, hasn't it? So just to keep our eye, it's not to lose a little bit of a sense of humor, but it's just to keep our eye on the ball. And what does it say to young women if they see older women being denigrated? If they see what they think about our bodies and, as you said, Lilliam, our sexuality, other parts of our lives, it's not a very good message. So in terms of politically and advocacy, and I would say funders as well, when you're thinking of issues of girls and women, this is not only just political, of course it is at the end of the day, but it's also how we're going to treat ourselves and how we're going to be allies with each other instead of, in a way, fighting each other for resources and other things. So I think I'm just going to, finish with that. But I'm so pleased, and again, I'm really happy this conversation is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobbie. Oh, you had something to throw in? Yes, please.
Thank you. So I had the pleasure of being part of an earlier, the first version 1.0, I guess, of this conversation. And it's really, it's had a major impact on how I think about these issues just personally, but also what the Commission on Human Rights is planning on doing moving forward. So we're the agency that enforces the New York City Human Rights Law, which is one of the broadest and most protective anti-discrimination laws in the country, covering the workplace, housing, and public spaces. And our age protections don't start at 40. There's no age. You could be discriminated against for being too young, too old, middle-aged. There's no limitation there. So one of the things that we're looking at is issuing what we call legal enforcement guidance. It's one of the tools that over the past several years we've found very successful in shifting. Really, it's about shifting the conversation. And we've been most successful most recently around the issue of discrimination on the basis of race with respect to hair, natural hair and hairstyles, most commonly associated with people of color. And having that as a way to just really shift the conversation about this and have people talk about it, and then other jurisdictions have followed. I'd like to have, not to assume that we have such great impact in everything we do, but we're hoping to issue legal enforcement guidance to discuss many of the issues that Bobbie and many of the advocates in the room and the Senator and Wendy have all brought to us around what age discrimination in the workplace looks like and what sort of embedded practices we do and use without ever questioning the impact it has on our hiring pool, on the culture the office perpetuates. And thinking about this through a gender lens, one of the questions that Wendy asked me in the prep for this is, how do we bring together the women's rights advocates and age justice advocates and think about this as all part of the same continuum. And I was thinking about how the Me Too movement obviously has been a watershed and continues to be. And if we are talking about women as sexualized beings, or we're calling out the fact that women have been hypersexualized at a certain point in their life, then we are setting those same women up, and this may be saying the obvious, for being disregarded immediately when we're either sexual or we're invisible or we're tossed aside. And so how can we have a conversation about the Me Too movement without having a conversation about this? It almost seems like we're missing an entire part of the conversation. And the idea that we set up these workplace expectations and norms for women and watch a younger generation come up into the workplace where there is this value placed on youth, or there's this value placed on the newest, shiniest thing, and sort of the people who don't have the sort of extra familial obligations of caregiving of whether it's children or older family members or spouses or partners, and then we sort of build them up and then cast them aside. So I think that, to me, this is almost like chapter 2 of the Me Too movement in a way, because if we are challenging how women have been treated, primarily women have been treated in the workplace as sexual and sexually available first, then is so appearance driven, then as soon as that component of their identity expires in this culture, then we're set up for complete and utter irrelevance. Because our only relevant aspect was our sexuality and our appearance. So that is a little bit of a light bulb moment for me. It probably is blatantly obvious to many, but again, as we think about shifting culture and shifting conversation, I think that has to be the next conversation when we talk about the impact of Me Too. And I just want to again, I know Senator Krueger will deflect, but I want to share my personal appreciation for being part of at the table for these conversations, because it has had a real tangible impact on the work that we are doing and the policies that we hope to publish. And just as an anecdote, when we look at our enforcement cases, so we try to change policy through issuing policy positions, but also enforcement. We bring cases against employers, against other entities in the city. And when we look at our overlapping claims with age in the workplace, the most common one is age and disability. But after that, it's age and gender, and it's all women. And so it's a form of harassment around people's lack of relevance, of lack of ability to kind of get along, to they're harder to work with, And so that is just sort of the on-the-ground kind of information that we see coming into the agency as we try to address these issues.
Thank you. And for people who might have missed her name before, this is Dana Sussman, and she's with the Human Rights Commission, and I want to just give a shout out. They as an agency, and she particularly, have been so responsive to so many issues that we have brought to her. So thank you. And for everyone to know, maybe you don't think about the Human Rights Commission as somewhere to go to get help, to get resolution to issues, both in a policy perspective through regulation or through a one-on-one cases. So I just want to do a little PR pitch. Take your issues to the Human Rights Commission, and we've worked on a lot of issues, including my favorite one every summer, the Breastfeeding Bill of Rights annual trip through the New York City subways, where and it's great, every year we have this big press conference at City Hall steps, and then breastfeeding mommies go off into the subways, and the press go with them every year to ask other people on the subway, are you concerned there's someone breastfeeding right behind you? And every year, the total strangers on the subway go, what's the big deal? Everything goes on the subway. And yet it's a story every year that, look, New Yorkers don't care if you breastfeed next to them on the subways, which is, of course, legal. We still, every once in a while, have problems with stores and companies being stupid. But my favorite was when Babies R Us was still not bankrupt. Right? We've gotten a complaint they weren't letting someone breastfeed in Babies R Us. Like, what do you think you exist for? If you're going to reject women with babies, you basically have a zero marketing concept. And they no longer exist. So, hello, women, younger women. We're also an economic power. So I want to go back to Lisa. So you did a tremendous presentation, and now you're hearing from some of us in New York. How do we get more involved in switching the attitudes and changing our own culture?
Well, I'd like to reiterate, I am so thrilled to be here. I came to tell you, this is an amazing forum, and a lot of the things, you'll see me nod a lot, because I'm just so excited to hear what's being said here, and thank you, Senator Krueger and Wendy, for bringing me, because I just have to say that, among other things, we talk about changing paradigms and social change, and I think, to be honest with you, it's both social change, but it's also the individual. And I think one thing I had in my notes was, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, that if you accept the stereotypes that are given to you, then you're almost doing such a disservice to yourself, but also society. And I really appreciate what was said about mentoring and role modeling, because we do have, each of us, the responsibility, one, to create a positive aging trajectory for ourselves, but also to show others and encourage others to see that positivity is there, positive experiences can be done as we age, as we become older adults and older women. It really is a social message that needs to counter, I think, and I appreciate the issue that Senator Krueger came up with, that sometimes we have these strange paradigms about what does it mean to get older. Like, I'm not a middle-aged person yet, I'm not at middle adulthood. And I was doing a radio program, I would say about 10 years ago, and a very nice young radio personality person asked me, well, what do you think about this concept of 60 is the new 40? And I stopped, and I said, no, 60 is 60, right? But you hear those messages, and they're very confusing. And that self-fulfilling prophecy of, oh, wait a minute, I now have to look 40? And I'm 60, and that creates stress. That creates so many different aspects of trying to change who you are that's ill-productive, right? And creates social conflict, social barriers, if you will, to who we are as human beings. And I think we really have to go back to social change comes from within. We have to be the role models that perpetuate that change. Each of us have to be an advocate for ourselves, but for society, for future generations as well as the current generation. We really do.
Thank you. So, Kathy Wylde, New York City Partnership, corporate New York, sexism in corporate New York, sort of well known. So, how are we doing with ageism also? Pull the mic up.
we've got a big demand in our labor market for skilled people, and I think that has created more of a meritocracy here than in many other places. So I don't think it's a particular issue. As I was listening to this conversation, though, I did hope that we would go back, not to advocacy, feminism, ageism, et cetera, but back to the real issues that are facing older women in our society, and also to some of the trade-offs that have to take place as we think about limited resources and how we're going to allocate them. I personally think that the debt we are leaving the next generation, my generation is leaving in the society, just the fiscal conditions is inexcusable. The fact that, and then there are real problems, like nobody's mentioned accessibility in the subway. The disability people carried that. The older people have done nothing really to support that effort. Or politically, that's such a hot issue. Am I wrong about that? You have done something.
My God, does my voice carry it?
No, AARP really focus. You go to a demonstration that's making an impact on the accessibility issue at the MTA. It is the folks in wheelchairs that are making it, and it's the younger people. So I just think we ought to go back to that. On the housing issue, we have for years fought density subdivisions in neighborhoods. We have a tremendous anti-development sentiment right now in the city at a time when we desperately need assisted housing, assisted living, senior housing, et cetera. We haven't really focused on that for 20 years, and recently we're going the other direction. So I think there's a lot of very practical issues that have to be addressed on the one side, and on the other side, in terms of balance, should somebody over 60 who's rich have a free subway pass or a discounted subway pass? Unclear to me. That we're not, so as we're thinking about these things, we ought to be thinking, should I be getting a Social Security check every month while I'm still working just because how old I am? And I don't need it?
Right, very good point.
So I think we've got to have a two-way conversation here about 80% of Medicaid payments. People think of Medicaid as being for low-income people. 80% of Medicaid payments go to people in the last 18 months of life, and yet we're fighting over choices that I'll have in the last 18 months of life. What am I going to do? And we're not dealing with these issues holistically, and I just don't like to hear a conversation that's one-sided and saying.
So I'm just going to jump back to your statement that there are 300,000 jobs looking for people. In corporate New York or specifically?
No, across the board. Those are listed job openings unfilled.
So, because Wendy and I have done some work to try to sort of find employers who are open to hiring older people, and it's been a stretch and a pull. Is there a way, do you think, to sort of do some messaging to and from companies that actually, when they're talking about looking for experience and professionalism, that the older worker may be exactly who they're looking for? Do you think that they are open to the idea of hiring older
Well,
people?
this has been enormously successful with veterans in the last 10 years, where you've seen hundreds of thousands of veterans who were basically out of work or underemployed and employed. And I think there's a good model there for the way to think about this. I sent Wendy a list of a number of companies, a couple dozen corporations and nonprofits that are doing reentry programs. And again, it's not necessarily aimed at people my age. It's aimed more at people in their 50s, particularly women who have dropped out of the workforce to raise a family or as caregivers. So I think there is stuff going on. With the veterans, the corporate community got together and aggregated the activity. So they were able to sort of multiply the impact, and kind of everybody got engaged. So I think you would have to do something along those lines.
Actually, 1 minute? No, that's because verbal, because it ties right into financial insecurity and what's happening and the data, and then I'll jump to you right after. Thank you, Merville. Regan.
I want to add my thanks for this opportunity to talk about these issues. We are most typically associated with the self-sufficiency standard and calculator that we work with, which coincidentally or not, is based on the work of Dr. Diane Pierce, who those many years ago coined the phrase feminization of poverty. So that's not an accident. I want to talk briefly about something that I heard and saw on television this morning as I was preparing to come here. It was on CBS this morning, and they were talking about distribution of wealth in this country. And an older white gentleman saw that they used pies, actually. So, most of the pies were in the 1%. And he said, well, I don't think it's fair for these people who work so hard and have amassed this wealth to have to share it with the rest of the country, where maybe people didn't go to college and didn't work as hard and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, seriously? And so I just want to talk briefly about a program that we had. It was the last direct service program that we did following the recession in across the country. We developed a program called Work Ready, because we were getting calls from so many women who had spent their lives working primarily for corporate America, who lost their jobs because it was very easy for them to be laid off as a result of the recession. We expected to see in the program a wide range of women. They were 90% women with college degrees who had worked for corporate America, who had been looking for jobs from 1 to 3 years with no success. These were women who were eminently prepared for the workforce, but were being discriminated against. And in some instances, they didn't know how to look for a job, which is why they sent out 2,000 resumes with no response. Within the context of that time, these were women who had done the right thing. They had gone to school, they had worked hard, and they had given their all for their corporate employers. They were devastated emotionally and financially at their inability to find work. So we worked with them over a number of years to get back at their workplace. In most instances, they could not find comparable jobs, but they were eminently qualified. And what we determined from that is that the recession made it easy to let them go, but they all felt, we dealt as much with their emotional well-being as we did with their skills and introducing them to technology and new ways of finding work. This was a very unique and valuable workforce that had just been kicked to the curb. And so my question really is this the public sense of women who are older and aren't doing well financially, that somehow they haven't done the right thing? I think these stories need to be communicated across the board. And I think also that there are public policies that we can engage in now that would help those women as well as younger women who haven't reached middle age. So in New York City, we have the opportunity with the salary history ban and the work on pay equity to help younger women start at a better place so that over time they're not so far behind. I've got tons of statistics. I won't use them today. But I will just highlight some of the public policy issues where we can begin to make a difference. One of them is updating the Supplemental Security Income Program. Another is providing Social Security credits to caregivers, which was mentioned. Increasing income eligibility for tax credits for older workers. And by the way, the organization in the United States that's done a lot of work on this recently is called Justice and Aging. And you can go to their website and get all of this information in greater detail. We can also expand eligibility for 401k participation because most people's resources are a result of investments, not necessarily pensions these days, because people don't work for as long with a single employer. Others are developing a long-term care benefit, which I believe we have in many instances in New York State. Increasing funding for housing programs for seniors, housing that's affordable, improving access to staff. What that means is raising the benefit cliff levels. So there are things that we can do rather immediately in the city as well as the state. And also
Lisa, I cut you off.
No. I just want to add a quick thing, and I completely agree with what's been said. There's this, I do research, I'm an industrial gerontologist, and one of my areas of research is looking at why corporations may not hire or rehire older workers. And here's just a stereotype I want to tell you that supports my literature, that employers do not believe that older adults can learn technology and that's just such a pervasive barrier. So I just wanted to offer that I completely agree, and I think that's one of those pink elephants in the room, if you will, that just create barriers, but absolutely agree with what's been said.
So actually, the issue of long-term care was referenced by Kathy and then followed up on. So I spent, not yesterday, but the day before, 12 hours in a health committee hearing. Of course, New York State's budget shows that we're about $2.5 billion in the hole for Medicaid. And a lot of people have been going, why is that? Why is that? And I'm thinking, how do you not know why? One, we got older, more people are using long-term care, so we're getting older and poorer, so people are eligible for Medicaid for long-term care. Two, because of the ACA and the state's actually very good job encouraging people to come and sign up so they have followed the federal law and avoided penalties. It turned out 40% of them who showed up were Medicaid eligible. They'd always been Medicaid eligible, but nobody ever said, come on down, we'll review you. And so we reviewed them, they were eligible, so we grew Medicaid from 4.7 people to 4.7 million people to 6.2 million people in New York State over like a 6-year period. Well, Medicaid costs are going to go up. So I'm always like, okay, we have a problem, but let's not get confused about what happened, because we actually know what happened. And you just referenced, there was long-term care insurance that was being sold in the state for years, except here's what happened, and it was national. The companies who were selling it apparently are the one universe of insurance companies who don't use actuaries, and didn't know everybody was going to be living longer, and everybody would be applying to use the benefits. And they all went belly up. There's like 2 companies left. No one in their right mind can afford to buy it anymore. So yes, one could say this is a new cost for states to have to confront as people live longer. But thank you very much. I'm bad at math, and I could do the actuary table. 25 years ago, you knew people would be living longer. Guess what? They live longer. Guess what? They want to actually use the benefits they paid for 25 years. So you all picked up and ran out of the business. And so there's all these issues confronting us. And then we have Jed Levine, who in fact runs an organization that provides caregiving services, but also I think is going to highlight that it's a women's issue on both ends, both the caregiving and the care needing.
Absolutely, and it is very much a women's issue. Alzheimer's disease is a women's issue. There are 2/3 of the people who have Alzheimer's are women. The majority of caregivers, probably up to 70 or 75%, are both family caregivers and paid caregivers, which is probably more like 90 or 95%, are women, and they are predominantly immigrant women and socioeconomically disadvantaged women, and they are kept at that level because we know that the pay rate, we know that 50% of paid caregivers, home care workers, are actually on public assistance because they cannot make a living wage, and it perpetuates this disparity and the impoverishment and the future impoverishment. We know that older women who are caring for a relative with the disease often will forego a promotion or an opportunity to travel because they can't, because they have to be home to care for their relative, their older relative. I also want to talk about that, yes, there's an economic impact, but there's a physical impact. These women are at greater risk for health crises later on in life. And we know that older spousal caregivers are at risk of predeceasing their spouse with dementia because of the stress, and they are not taking care of themselves. You ask the question, what does it mean to be both older and a woman? And I think that means that you're either caring for somebody, or as an older woman, you're also caring for yourself or trying to. And if you're caring for somebody else, then there's not enough time or space to do that self-care, so that your own medical conditions are neglected, and you create, and this all has a health economic outcome as well, because it creates greater need. And so we've created a system, and I don't know who created this, where we have to become impoverished. We have to be very wealthy, or you have to be impoverished to access long-term care. And we've made the path to long-term care exceedingly complicated, intimidating, daunting, whether you have a college degree and you know this system well. I've done this for my own family, and you become overwhelmed and you're spending hours and hours trying to access long-term care. Or if you're an immigrant, you don't speak English well, you don't understand the system, and it's very difficult to access. So we put up all of these barriers to long-term care. And I think it's, you know, as Amy Klobuchar said in the last debate, she said it's the elephant in the room. You know, and not everybody is going to age healthfully. We hope they do, and we know that people, you know, we are much healthier older adults than we ever have been. There's less disability, there's more mobility, there are fewer sensory deficits. The one area, and we're seeing the shift now, but we have not really tackled the issue of cognitive impairment. Although we have some clues now about lifestyle and things that we can do, and precision medicine approaches to understanding ways to improve the health of the way of keeping our brains healthy. But basically, we still don't have a good treatment for Alzheimer's or other dementias. We don't really have the data yet to support that this is a way to prevent it. We have clues, and I'm very optimistic that that's where we're going to end up. But we have millions of Americans who are dealing with this now, and millions of family caregivers who are dealing with that. And so we need to pay attention to and put a spotlight on the needs of those people and have greater access to care services. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think many family caregivers want to continue caregiving but need support to do that. We need more respite services. We need more access to education and guidance and helping people navigate this very complicated system of long-term care. So I'm very glad to be able to talk about this, because this is something that's going to affect almost everybody in this room.
Thank you. Thank you. So we had a quick change with the district commissioner not being able to be with us, but with Azadeh Khalili. That's okay, right?
Yes.
So you've got the agency that's supposed to be dealing with a lot of these issues. Are we changing what we're doing? Are we seeing better models to address issues for older women?
Yeah, thank you for this, and again, Commissioner Cortez Vasquez is very sorry to not be here this morning, and thank you for this opportunity. NIFTA's mission is to alleviate ageism and ensure dignity and quality of life for elder adults. Just on a personal note, I was born and raised in Iran, and I lived with my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother in the same household. While the conditions for women were extremely oppressive, within the household, of course, women had tremendous amounts of power, but women did not live long lives. We did not have and here in the U.S., women live longer lives. And longevity for women, however, does not translate into more justice, right? It does not translate into more income. Poverty, sexism, vulnerability to loneliness and isolation create fertile ground for abuse and exploitation, placing older women in huge risk. Older women make up the majority of elder abuse cases that we are seeing at DFTA. And we are working very closely with a number of other agencies in New York City, including the Commission on Gender Equity and NYPD, to address elder abuse and violence and sexual violence against older women. This year, a number of folks at the table, women at the table, Lilliam and Bobbie have mentioned that we need a paradigm change. And we completely agree with this issue, and we believe that a change in paradigm is needed, and that we need to really talk about a story of resilience and power source, as you mentioned, Bobbie, and really talk about what it means to be older and bolder. This year, we will be, we're working on 3 campaigns. One campaign that already is out is on elder abuse, and we will be concentrating on two other campaigns. One is on social isolation, as it affects many different target populations, but specifically women. And the third campaign will be on elimination of ageism. So we're very excited to have a chance to work with many of you on these campaigns and really work on the paradigm change.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And when I mentioned before that we were joined by Councilwoman Helen Rosenthal, I failed to mention that she's the chair on the Committee on Women in the City Council. So I know she's been here taking notes, and I know we can count on her to follow up through the council on anything we can do together to paid city ventures. Would be great, because we want to get working on these issues. So it was touched on just by one person briefly, but it's the elephant in the room for every topic in New York City. Affordable housing, specifically as it relates to the needs of older New Yorkers, and older New Yorkers are women, so as it relates to women who are older, the intersectionality of their poorer, as highlighting what Merville was showing us, and anyone who hasn't looked at Merville's research, it's invaluable whenever you're trying to understand the demographic realities of income and any population within New York. So, Vicki, you have your portfolio, affordability of housing, and you have a long career in and outside government working on this. How are we going to, given the myriad assignments you have for the desperate need for affordable housing, are there promising new models? Are there things we should be particularly focused on when trying to ensure that aging women who are lower income don't become the next new crisis in our homeless population? I know my district is almost the rule. If somebody's coming and facing homelessness, they're an elderly woman. So granted, I have a wealthier district, but the people who are being pushed out of their housing because of their inability to pay their rent are older women who are living on fixed incomes, have held on in the same rent-regulated apartment for 40 years, and frankly have just maxed out whatever money and savings they had. And I know it's a growing population, and I also know if it's a problem in my district, it's a crisis in almost every other district. So tell me what we're going to do to address it.
So obviously, it takes even more than a village to address this issue. But let me tell you some of the things that we're doing. First and foremost, I mean, when I came back to city government, I did so because NYCHA is my #1 priority. Not that ours, public housing houses 1 out of every 22 New Yorkers, and many, many, many of our NYCHA residents are older and are older women, right? And they are often older women who are the sandwich caregivers. They're both taking care of grandchildren and taking care of older folks. And so addressing the needs at NYCHA are absolutely critical. And as we are doing comprehensive rehabs, which we're trying to do, we have a plan to do 6,000 to 2,000 comprehensive rehabs in the next 10 years. We're actually doing very well on that goal. We've finished or almost finished about 5,000. We've got another 10,000 already underway, and are in the pre-development for another 10,000 this year. So in those comprehensive rehabs, we are really trying to pay attention to the needs of all NYCHA residents, but especially the older and older women, to make those apartments much safer, much more accessible. I mean, you go to some of our, often 1980s, 1970s designed NYCHA buildings that some architect thought it was a good idea to have on 2 levels, or, it's crazy, the housing stock that we're left with. And so we're very much trying to bring those homes up to, first of all, just a state of good repair, but also a state of safety and age appropriateness. We're also trying to use land on NYCHA campuses to build new senior housing, including new senior housing models. So, for example, we just did the ribbon cutting on a new senior residence on NYCHA land that is LGBTQ friendly, right? We can't say that it's LGBTQ only, nor would we want to, but we make clear that it's LGBTQ, and that is one of the intersectionality issues that is most crucial. So NYCHA is my #1 priority and should be a #1 priority on this particular issue. On the broader affordable housing front, I mean, we are really trying to prioritize building more age-restricted housing, both new construction and some preservation. Usually when we talk about preservation, we are guaranteeing the longer-term affordability of places where, of course, people are living now. So we take the residents as we find them, and we find them aging, all of them, but to be sure. But we also find just huge numbers of older folks, and especially older women. So in our Mitchell-Lama housing, in our, in apartments that were made affordable in the 1980s and 1990s, we see that those tenants are now, certainly aging. And so our preservation programs are very much geared to ensuring the continued affordability of those homes. Obviously, and a shout out again to Senator Krueger and to the state Senate and the Assembly for the reforms in rent regulation, which helped stem the tide of that abuse that was taking place in terms of pushing people, often older people. I've had so many older folks tell us that they felt like they were the first in a building to be pushed out by a landlord trying to empty and turn over the building because they were seen as the least powerful, least likely to be able to fight that. So that's really critical. The other things that I want to point out is for everyone aging in whatever homes they're in, making the homes friendly to people who are aging is so critical, and it's expensive, right? And so one of the things that we're doing is providing loans to homeowners, forgivable loans and very low interest loans for existing homeowners to be able to make those kinds of repairs, where we are just launched a program called Home Fix, where we will give loans to people to make them friendly to people as they age. 40 to 50% of the people who are coming to us for any kind of assistance with their current apartments or current homes are seniors looking for improvements in keeping them, in making them appropriate for people as they age. As we design our housing, and we're designing, of course, both more age-restricted housing, but also more housing for people with a variety of disabilities, including, of course, the need for supportive care. And as we're designing all of those different kinds of housing sources, we are really focused on both making them physically accessible, but also dealing with this critical issue of loneliness, right? So in our senior buildings, we are making sure that there's lots of programming, and many people in the room are involved in some of that programming for, excuse me, for our senior housing residents, but also just providing a place that they can go to, even if there's not a program, but just providing a place that they can go to, talk to other people. As I think Lilliam was saying, that the tragedy of being in an apartment all day long and not hearing any other voice except the stuff that you hear on TV and radios, which is frightening in and of itself. But it's so isolating, and so we're really trying to make sure that the developers of our buildings are paying attention to those issues. Women, and especially older women, are so much at risk for homelessness, in part because the tools that we have are flawed in terms of their enforcement. So there is such rampant source of income discrimination. So we give an older woman a voucher, but how to use that voucher when a landlord doesn't take it, and again, thinks that an older woman is a good target for excluding because of the powerlessness of that. So both with the Human Rights Commission, with our Department of Social Services, we're really trying to ramp up our enforcement of those source of income discrimination rules. We're standing up a lot more testing so that we can get at that. Homes, of course, are in a neighborhood, and so one of the things that we're really trying to work with our developers on and bring in all of the work that we're doing in our cultural agencies is our parks are often unbelievably unfriendly to people with disabilities and to older folks, and yet that's a place that they can go to get outside, to mingle with people, to see, to take their grandchildren, etc. So we've got a big initiative in parks to try to make those more senior friendly, and then to use our cultural agencies and our cultural institutions to bring older people in. Last but not least, let me just say that, of course, affordability is both about the cost of housing and about your income. So we've got a broad set of programs to try to help, especially women and older women, increase their income, starting with things like Women NYC, along with the AAR, the American Association of University Women, have been conducting salary negotiation workshops all around town, trying to teach people how to negotiate for themselves more effectively. And of course, all the work that this city has done to keep people from asking about prior salaries, which particularly is harmful to women, particularly those who have been out of the workforce for a while. So all of those efforts, but everything from, we are now looking at ways to address the issue that you raised about people thinking that older people can't learn technology, right? And we're exploring, again, Women NYC and Faye are exploring things like programs, Mothers Who Code, right? We've been very successful with young women who code. Let's bring mothers who code and mothers returning to the workforce who code. Women are often very able to be entrepreneurs, and so we're just launching something that we call New Venture 50 Plus to bring people over the age of 50 into entrepreneurship things. And then we're trying to provide pathways to better incomes and to better careers, especially again in our NYCHA residents, taking advantage of the things that women are so much part of the workforce on now. Food pathways, catering pathways, all of those things to try to bring women in those jobs into more of a career. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So I'll do one lobbying pitch for Helen from the council and for Vicki. So New York City started a program to provide free legal representation to avoid eviction. And it's targeted to communities that are poorest, and I get why. But where poor seniors are not necessarily demographically a match with the geography when you say start with the poorest district. So I can have some of these equally poor seniors in other districts who don't have the right to get legal representation for housing court. And the reason the council started this great program was the recognition that if you don't have a lawyer and your landlord is trying to evict you and he or she 99% of the time has a lawyer, you're gonna lose. So if somebody would just, maybe just look at the data and talk a little bit about how this program, while critical, has forgotten about older poor women because they don't fit in the exact same box that overlaps the districts. So that's my one.
And I think this goes to the issue of intersectionality,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that
Yes.
when you begin to see the gender lens with the property, then you won't miss that population where the
Right, exactly. So
We are rolling it out over
I
a
know.
5-year period. We're getting to the end of that 5-year
All
period.
right,
Thank goodness.
get it
So,
in every community, absolutely. So they're advertising all over these new work-live spaces and co-living spaces that are all targeted to people 3 years out of college.
Right.
Lilliam, do you think that model is potentially doable for older people as well, dealing with isolation and cost and shared resources?
So let me say that I'll absolutely take a stab at that, but I think that Vicki and Kathy are the real housing gurus in this space. But I do think that it will work for a limited number of seniors that are willing to either open their apartments to other people who may need it. I may have an economic impact on them and all of that. But I think that the problem is that there's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to find many alternative housing models for different kinds of people. So for some people, communal living is wonderful. For some people, that doesn't really work. I think that's the problem, that we're trying to find the magic bullet, and it doesn't exist. And what we have to do is find many, many different alternative housing models. I think it's the same thing with employment. There's no magic bullet about what kind of job you train for. Many, many, many different kinds of things. So I think that's the key. I think that the idea that people will be very happy to welcome a perfect stranger into their homes, it's limited. It's very limited. I think most of us, particularly in New York, I think we are all fiercely, we guard that closet space we live in.
You can have the sofa, but not my closet, right? All right, I'm just going to turn it back to Anna Oliveira, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
So I wanted to say that listening to the discussion and thinking about some of the things that some of us, certainly in your consultation, think about. Like, where are the most important pivotal points for investment? Looking at philanthropy as financial investment, but also human investment. And when I say investment, it's both investment of dollars and investment in the work, in the partners, with what's happening. And it seems to me that part of this big shift that we're talking about in our paradigm is the time perspective that we look at aging, right? Many people talked about that, beginning with you, right, Dr. Sarkis. So that's one. So if we shift that time perspective, then we look at aging and as a human development thing, as it was said, and it really would change how we make our decisions. It would change how we make our decisions about preschool. It would change how we make our decisions about schooling. It would change how we make our decisions about living wages. It would change how we make our decisions about, generating some of the problems with the way we do business in our lives. They don't only lack generating earlier what happens later, right? So that's one thing. The other that I wanted to say is that we do not live in a resource-poor environment. Concepts of scarcity are very adequate for resource-poor environments. New York City, New York State, and even the United States of America is not a resource-poor environment. That means that the issues are not about we don't have enough, but it is what we do with what we have. What are our priorities? So I think it's important for each of us in the domains that we operate to be an agent of change in that domain. At the foundation, we have seen through the work of our grantee partners that given conditions of support and value and dignity, I use the word dignity as an expression expression of value. I use the word dignity as the best word we can come up. In what would it look like if we had equality of value amongst people? So that people excel. So it's not so much an individual issue of behavior, but that with the right conditions, when people are not desperate for their survival, when people are not in a defensive mode about how they look, how old they are, their competence, their health, the issue of, and we talked a little bit about the issue of health challenges and the visibility of health challenges, the threat of those health challenges becoming visible, the perception that employers, and I'm going to say, in government, in corporate, and not-for-profit, I'm talking about everybody, just everybody. So it is a defensive environment in which we operate. And I would like to say that black women, brown women, immigrants, poor women, older women, women with visible disabilities, women that come from families with low financial wealth, living, I don't know, 10 times defensive environment. So we need to put in perspective the ability for people to take on these fights individually. It's not real. It's not real. The burden is not in the individual changes, in the policy changes, in the larger changes. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that we did not mention enough, I think, the impact of our approach in the aging in the criminal justice system and all the consequences of that. We learned from our grantee partners that when women do time, when anyone does time in their families, and all that that means for the breaking up of families. I think it was mentioned before about, yes, some of us come from very strong cultural traditions that honor our ancestors, living and otherwise, that understand that our survival is based on being in touch with our roots and our values that way. But that the policies, including immigration policies, but also, remnants of slavery policies, they were designed and remain designed to break up family bonds, to break up family strength. So I wanted to put forth that, yes, there's a lot we can do there as well. And, but the unit of analysis cannot be the individual. It has to be more on the lines of public health issues, community health issues, even I'm going to say community economic issues. We know that economy thrives more when all do better. We know that. So I think that the return on investment is a win-win for every sector, but that the investment needs to be, not just a Band-Aid investment. We need to make investments that change from the beginning. And the other issue that we didn't talk about is violence, is safety and violence throughout the lifespan. But how it, earlier experiences also determine what happens with us later in life. So I just wanted to put that out there before we open it. And then in terms of philanthropy, my own accountability. And that is that no matter what work you do, you may do something that is specifically focusing on our populations 50 plus. But you may be working in education, you may be working in housing, you may be working in transportation, in health, it doesn't matter what it is, cultural creations, because narrative change in belief systems and campaigns, dismantling racism is an ongoing work that we are committed to. Dismantling ageism is going to require the same, right? But philanthropy can and should respond to you. It's very impossible for philanthropy to fund direct services forever. We just don't have enough money. Even the biggest foundations in the universe, that's a governmental public responsibility. But we are responsible for funding explorations, funding responses that come up, funding ideas that can be amplified. So please come to us as well, hold us as well accountable in terms of seeing you and seeing your work. So I wanted to say that as I'm saying that
we need to see other people. With philanthropy, we need to see it too.
Perfect, thank you. And just, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, we've been videotaping this, and it will be available online on my website. Thank you, Justin. So some of you might want to replay Anna's speech when you go into your foundation for additional funding. I really appreciate that. All right, we're going to try to open it up to some questions. So if you just raise your hand, and I will try to go back and forth between the two sides of the room. Hi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chanel Portia Albert. I'm the founder and president of Agents on Doula Services. We're a full spectrum reproductive health organization located in Brooklyn, New York, but we serve all boroughs. And so I also wanted to say that I'm 40 years old, and I'm happy to say that I'm 40 years old. And a mother of 6 beautiful children who inform the work that I do every single day. And so I really didn't have any questions, but I really had comments. Based on the conversation that was had today, and I wanted to thank you, Senator Krueger, for creating a platform for the discussion in and of itself. So I really wanted to address the reproductive health supports of childbearing and child-rearing individuals of 40-plus age, and how those individuals who are 40-plus, who are having children still and are able to have children, how supports and systems are not necessarily in place to be able to support them, as well as to center their autonomy within their birthing experiences. Also thinking about grandparents, and how I was fortunate that when my mother passed at the age of 14, to have wonderful grandparents to take on the supports of taking care of 2 children that were not her own. Well, they already raised 3, and now they got 2 more to raise, right? But what that means in creating a network of support that is intergenerational to support grandparents, who sometimes then have to now go back into a workforce and or look at educational shifts. And so really creating funding for social independence and development for individuals as they start to age. They start to think about career changes and what that means. And so what does it mean to support them in either going back to school, having grant funding programs, as well as starting a new business if they so choose to. And then housing stability.
I'm going to just quickly cut you off just because you're right, and your 5 additional roundtables this week. My last is housing stability, and really looking at how gentrification has played a huge role, in particular on people of color within historically Black communities within New York City, as well as Latino communities, and what does it mean to actually access those supports. So it's one thing to say that there's a support, but it's another thing to access it in a way that makes that person feel like they have autonomy over themselves, and centering their community. I really want to lift up race and class, and so when we're talking about this conversation, thinking about taking it from an intersectional approach, and what does it mean to now put on the fact that you may be a Black or Latino or Latinx individual who is accessing services, or of a certain class dynamic. And I feel like some of the conversation wasn't necessarily geared towards, it was brought up in little pockets, but it didn't really touch on it in a broader expansion. And so really having those deep conversations and what that means to center those people. Thank you. Okay, I see, I'm going to go to this side. You had your hand up. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Hi, thank you, Senator Krueger, for gathering this group, and thanks to the panelists. I'm Bay 10 from Women.NYC. We're a New York City government initiative designed to help women succeed in their businesses and careers. We are housed at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which is geared toward making sure that New York City's future is equitable and inclusive, and that includes workforce. And I am pushing for age equity to be a growing part of that conversation at EDC. But here's what I see, right? I see industries on the downslide that were hospitable to women, say print media and retail, And I see industries on the upswing, tech, cybersecurity, data analysis, coding, all of these fields that have far less representation of women than the fields that are declining. And so when we talk, especially, let's talk about tech, where 30 years is considered over the hill in a lot of places, and especially in startup culture. And when we're looking at ways to help older women in the workforce, we have to look at tech. And we learned at EDC that it's never enough to give people skills. You have to create the hiring commitments, right? It's like, send somebody to a JavaScript boot camp and see if they can get a job. They will get a job when you also line up hiring partners to hire the JavaScript boot camp graduates. So this is as much a question for Kathy, probably primarily a question for Kathy as anybody else, but how do we create the demand side of the equation for older workers, right? How do we create those hiring pipelines? How do we take industries, the variety of tech industries, and make them more hospitable to older workers? Because that's where the change has to reside. We can have all the messaging we want, and everyone in this room wants to do the right thing, but until the companies who are hiring, say specifically in tech, are willing and committed to talking to older workers, and hiring older workers, it's not going to change.
Well, just realistically, when you talk to the tech community, they say if you don't start in kindergarten learning the way they think, you're out of it. So it's a very hard conversation to have. There is a group, a nonprofit group in Queens that's a Pursuit that's taking people who are adults who have no tech background and does a program to prepare them, and they've been successful in getting people into positions. Same with Perscolas has been doing for a number of years, but they're all focused on younger career entrants, 30s and below. I think that there would have to be a public policy decision to say we want to create these programs or apply these programs to older workers, as we have done with veterans and others, and ex-offenders. So that's certainly possible.
Virgil, you also want an answer.
I just want to say that I might take issue with that. My first job out of college was computer programming. And the way the determination was made about who to hire was a series of tests, not necessarily measuring academic accomplishment, but a way of thinking. And so I know that it's conventional wisdom that young kids who now use these devices are in a better position. I don't agree with that. I think we should
I wasn't representing that opinion. I'm just quoting the tech people.
No, I agree with you. It is what they say, but I'm here to say I question that. And in response to the comments that were just made, I didn't eliminate the issue of race intentionally. I just thought we were looking at a wider scope. But I would say in terms of double jeopardy, women of color are also dealing with what we call triple jeopardy. A term coined by Francis Beale many years ago. And if they are older, we are talking about quadruple jeopardy. And so I think we were looking at the breadth of the problem and the depth in some respects. But when we develop public policies and solutions, we need to take that into consideration.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, hands up.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. What a great, were you calling me?
Yes, I
Oh,
was. So you press the red button?
got it.
Okay.
Happy to, I'm pressing it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you have to keep holding it. I'm a proud New Yorker, not in your district, Senator
Yes,
Cruz, but
okay.
happy to be here. I live in Cuba County, in New York State, so in the Finger Lakes. I'm Lisa Marsh-Ryerson, the president of AARP Foundation. Just delighted to be here with Ben Finkel, my wonderful colleague from AARP, and so many of you were colleagues. And just wanted to underscore a great point you made, which is, yes, paradigm shift important, but I appreciate this undercurrent of dialogue that unless we address systemic racism, embedded indifference, and discrimination, there'll be no new paradigm that will take root to solve this. As it relates relates to workforce, Beth will be able to share with everyone new research from AARP, the World Economic Forum, the OECD, on living, learning, and earning longer. In essence, never miss a good crisis. There are jobs that need to be filled in this nation, and the population is aging. The research indicates that a multi-generational workforce is great for the bottom line. And so stay tuned for that. I think it should inform our campaigns. As it also relates to workforce, it is true that I think we have to just shift the whole, through policy, through governmental setup, and our own work in philanthropy, we have to shift the paradigm for collective impact. It's very true what you said. Unless there are employers who will accept those who've been trained, we're not going to shift this. I think we have to look at education policy. I was college president for 20 years in New York State of a women's college. You can imagine why this conversation is equally important to me. But, you know, no longer, lack of opportunity is so related to educational acquisition. But we have to get rid of this mythology that once you get a degree at any level, you're trained or educated. So thinking about, I think New York City could lead in this. How do you develop a more connected ecosystem of learning and engagement that provides for upskilling, reskilling, and retraining across the work, life, and health span? And leadership in this area is really needed. Then always a shout out, Linda, to you, because we love having experience for AARP Foundation. Intergenerational and multi-generational solutions for poverty are important, but they have to be evidence-based. And so we took on the program because you developed one that built in the rigor of evidence, but also you helped us understand that seniors and older adults are not problems to be solved like a medical model, but are assets to be leveraged in society. And matching purpose. Experience Corps uses low-income volunteers in communities, underserved communities, and it is working brilliantly for students, schools, and for older adults. So sorry to go on so long. We fund some of you, looking forward to partnering with others as well as we meet these exciting challenges.
Thank you very much. All right, very far back. Last person, last row.
Good morning. My name is Doris Welch, and I'm the president of the New York City chapter for the Alliance for Retired Americans, New York State. And first and foremost, thank you, Senator. For the panelists, I'm very appreciative. One of the things that I would like to see this panel do is take it on the road. Unfortunately, we have a lack of communication within the boroughs. You talk about wonderful programs for transportation, housing, but if you're not getting into those communities in which you want to serve and the information you want to provide, you are doing us a disservice as well as yourselves. I'm looking around this room and I see beautiful white people. I would love to have seen some beautiful people of color. It's early in the morning. I don't think a few black people are going to have a problem getting up. But the bottom line is, if we do not get out to talk about all of these wonderful programs and panel, we have DIFTA here. You have to come out to those churches. You have to come out to these organizations. And talking about the Housing Authority, I worked for the Housing Authority for 28 years. Didn't see many people come out to talk to the community. And I ran a development. I would like to see you come out.
Thank you. Linda?
Thank you. Just to build on your taking it on the road comment, I wanted to say that this conversation, I think, is important in terms of what it's opening up, but obviously not a concluding discussion. Many issues have been opened up. The need for transformational change in every one of them is what everybody's saying. And the need for a unified vision so that women are not divided against each other based on all our intersectional characteristics is critical. I think there's an opportunity, which is that this year is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. What better in this country to create a vision for the the next 100 years. That brings us together in a unified transformational agenda. And to celebrate for this year, taking it on the road into communities and converging so that we have a shared agenda, the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage.
Thank you. Yes, Vifta.
Yeah, hi, I wear another hat, and I'm on the planning committee of the NGO committee on the status of women, and this year is also the 25th anniversary of Beijing. And I know that around the globe, women have decided that they would like the theme of this year's agenda to be generation equality, and it's about intersectionalities and bringing older and younger women together to build a unified agenda so that we're not divided based on age, and that we will stand by each other and have each other's back as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, Jen.
I just want to mention that, in New York, we're privileged to have had the first and the most successful age-friendly movement here, which is a public-private partnership between the mayor's office and the city and IAM, and it's been, there are a lot, we're talking about housing, we're talking about architectural changes, there are two really wonderful materials that are available. We have the Image NYC, which is a interactive database to show all kinds of demographic information about where older adults are and where those resources are across the boroughs. So it's a great resource, and I think it's, we need to do more about publicizing and letting people know about it. But we really set the standard in New York City for an age-friendly community. And we're seen as really as the gold standard. So I want to acknowledge that exists, and Lindsay and Judy Salerno are here from NIAM, who've done tremendous work to create and promote that. So there are opportunities for people to know about the resources and to use those effectively.
Thank you. Hello. Oh, sorry, Helen, next. No, is that all right? Yeah, of course. Councilwoman. Press button.
Okay, works. Thank you all for your help. I just want to make the point that, is anyone surprised that we're sitting around the table and all these people here who are engaged and interested, that we're having this conversation, right? No, none of us are surprised. I got my master's in public health 35 years ago, and we were being taught in the master's program these exact same issues, right? So all of us have been slugging away at this for a really long time. And I can't help but notice that there are very few women, very few older women who are elected to office. And it is, at the end of the day, the lawmakers who should be thinking about and implementing this framework that we're talking about, the framework that all of us have at our fingertips. So I do have to note that in 2021, there will be an opportunity to elect women to the New York City Council. And right now, the number of females in the council are 12 out of 51. That number has gone down every electoral term, from 18 to 15 to 13 and down. So I would encourage people to take this seriously, take the opportunity for New York City to become more age-friendly, to be less ism. Pay attention to local elections. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I took your slot to give it to the councilwoman. So now I'll let you have your slot.
Councilmember Andrea Chinbriner, her dream is to have a like a training program where we train older people how to run to office, older women how to run for office.
I'm available.
I so appreciate all of the information here today. What I keep thinking about, and I would love to hear any responses regarding, is even though we do not exist in a scarce society, which I totally agree with, the feeling in the field, so at Levine I represent all the community-based service members who work in aging. There is a feeling of scarcity, and that comes from their own background that they're coming from, the folks who are working in the field, in addition to the folks that they are serving. And so when we pause and think about what's actually happening on the ground, that's when we see examples of systemic change. So Bobbie worked on this for so many years. You funded the work on elder abuse, and that really changed and spurred a lot of movement on how we think about elder abuse and how precincts are addressing elder abuse. But that came from giving the providers an opportunity to tell Bobbie that, you know, perpetrators are translating for older victims. So we hear from, you know, Deputy Mayor Levine has been so supportive of housing. You know, that happens when providers come forward and say, wait a second, we have to give our clients housing. But the point I'm trying to make is those conversations are hard to have because we're often siloed. You know, I was a women's studies major. I love hearing feminist theory, but I don't think about it all, and I think I'm working in aging, although these things are obviously intersectional. So I'd be really interested how we pause, and as someone who likes to run before walking, how we take our time to have meaningful and purposeful conversations around this as a field so that those things can bubble up and we're not existing in a constant state of scarcity and constantly yelling at DIFTA. And rather, you know, work at how we work on this together and how we make room for those things, because that's where the solutions are going to come from. They're not always going to come from government. They can't always come from philanthropy. We have to, that has to bubble up. So I'm curious.
That's exactly why we decided to have this roundtable this morning, not because we thought we would come up with all the answers and say mission accomplished, but so that we could actually come together and say these are all intersectional issues for every one of us in our lives and our communities, and how can we go forward and hopefully work together better, get to know each other better, and concretely push both government and the private sector to be more responsive. So thank you. All right, I've ignored this side for too long. Hello, hands. Okay, the woman, yes, second to the last row.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Liv Wright. Hi, Kathy. For the last 12 years, I have been writing a blog called The Wise Boudoir, and it's about intimacy for women over 50. So I really just wanted to acknowledge the panelists who used the term designed in loneliness, how our culture, how our history has designed in loneliness. So this is a thank you to that panelist, don't know who it is, who gave me that thought. So I just wanted to acknowledge you.
Thank you. Yes, right here.
Good morning. My name is Joanna Altman-Smith. I'm on CD6
See
Brooklyn.
if you can press the red button.
I hear myself a little bit. There, I think close to Joanna Altman-Smith, CD6 Brooklyn, and kind of professional citizen involved in a lot of these intersectional issues. And there were two I wanted to throw on the table that we didn't talk about very much today. One is looking at the child care crisis in our country as preventative medicine for so many of the problems that we see further down the line, and a great way to engage younger women in older women's issues. The longer we can keep people in the workforce, the less we're going to be dealing with this aging into poverty issue. Second issue is mobility issues that face an aging population around New York, and also caregivers. I do a lot of Safe Street work, and I just have to point out how hard it is to get around the city if you are pushing a stroller, how hard it is to get on a bus if you just had a hip transplant, how hard it is to ride a bike share if an electronic version is not offered. So just thinking, you know, we have all these great opportunities in place for women of a certain age, but how are they going to get there, and how are they going to get there safely?
Thank you. Okay, over here, anyone else? Over here, anyone? Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am.
Hi everyone, thank you. My name is Lenny Brown. I oversee a mental health training company, agency in Harlem. I find this conversation really interesting for a couple things. One is, this is just like a side comment for one, is as Black women, I've always been invisible, right? So in our power in that, since we've been growing up invisible, we have a stealthness that we could use for a stealthness that we can really move and work with. And I think that needs to be part of our agenda, that there's a lot of us who already know how to kind of maneuver a lot of this, right? And that needs to be brought to the table. The second thing is, I really think there's a real force in entrepreneurship when it comes to older people, because we have this sense of wisdom, and we also do need personalized and person-centered initiatives in order to be able to figure out how to become part of or remain part of the financial and economic population. Just because, honestly, you know, I don't want to work for 20 years old anyway. Like, I really want to, I really want to use my age and use what I know and be able to say, how can I use the resources, what I know, who I know, what's in my bank account, what's not in my bank account, like everything that I know, and how can I use that to move the economy forward, right? I would need specific help to do that. I'd like professionalism, like people to be specialized in that, to be able to say, you know, looking at people, what we can actually do and bring can be something that's new. Because it sounds to me what we need to do really is, we need to come up with new ways that older people can contribute, as opposed to trying to stuff us into what's already there.
So did you know about this new ventures, entrepreneurship for 50 and older before today?
No, I never heard of that, no.
Okay, so we all need to learn a lot more
Exactly.
about that.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's research showing older women are actually exceptionally good at being entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But of course, they need some help in technical assistance. Yes.
This is a question, not a comment.
Yeah.
I think, well, first a comment, then a question. I think I even see it in my own workspace at a government agency where we are navigating different generations within one workplace. I'm sort of a bit in the middle of the sort of the most recent graduates, newer professionals, and an older generation. And the work style is different, like it is. And I think we are all challenged with how we work with each other, where you're coming from very different places. I think it is incredibly valuable and rich, obviously, to have a diversity of ages and generations and experiences in the workforce. That goes without saying, but are there resources for employers to better understand how to, I think there's a lot of conversations with my bracket around working with like the younger millennials, even just among my professionals group. But I also want to see are there resources for us and others to navigate these multi-tiered generations within one workforce? Because I think it could do us a lot of good.
You know, and I kind of wish, what I wish is that we would stop talking about this as if it's so new, right? It's time immemorial, right? It's been going on because we've always had a multi-generational workforce, but by nature, we just have to have it. So I think that what we haven't done is documented how people have done that successfully. The other thing is, we have different interventions in terms of the development of technology, right? So in the industrial age, you had one kick in. Now we're in this incredible technology age, it's very different. And yes, you know, you learn differently. You were introduced to technology a lot earlier. I, you know, was introduced when I entered the workforce. I became a lot nimbler and more receptive of newer technologies than my older counterparts, but it doesn't mean that they're not. So I just think that sometimes our paradigm is that everything's so new, when quite frankly, I was a millennial before millennials came, because I was 21. So, you know, I never kept a job for more than 4 years in my life. I just haven't. And so it's this sense that there's so much uniqueness is what I think hampers us, instead of taking the historical view and saying, you know, we've been here before, different contexts, and we survived. How do we survive in an inclusive way? I think that's the real challenge, right? That we have to be inclusive, that the role of mentoring, because that young person in my workforce, although he or she may not know it, will be old one day. Could be 50 if you're lucky one day, right? And so it's how we start to train that. But you know, we've survived it as a country.
country where the globe has survived it, different contexts, and I think, I would just say maybe if we pull up some stuff from Harvard Business Review or something, you may find that this stuff's been there, minus the computer and Bill Gates.
Okay, for the last question, Susan. Oh, sorry.
Hi, Susan Stamler with United Neighborhood Houses. Somewhat of a question and a comment. I agree, everything old is new again, and one of the issues is, especially in community-based programming, too often programs are siloed, partly because that's how government thinks. And so people walk in the front door and they want to be connected to a whole host of programs and issues. And the first question shouldn't be how old you are, it should be what is it that you'd like to do. And so it would be really interesting to look at the programs. And in New York City, we know we're so fortunate to have DYCD, with DIPTA, a whole host of other agencies that fund programs, but to look, can we create multi-generational programs instead of these siloed efforts and create much more of a unified community?
Great. I think that's a great way for us to close. That should be our assignment. I want to thank everyone on the panel for your tremendous, serious dialogue about these very complicated issues. Thank everyone who attended with us today from the audience. And again, this was never intended to be and now we're done. It's 11 a.m., this issue's over, but hopefully to keep everybody thinking about how